tiny bit. Welcome everybody, hello. I'm introducing Jacqueline Reid-Walsh. Movable, interactive, pull tab, pop out, turn up, accordion and tunnel books, paper dolls and toy theaters, all are part of the playful media world of Jacqueline Reid-Walsh. It is my pleasure to introduce this paper-thin, girl-lit scholar who has an astounding list of accomplishments. Jackie is a friend of this library and one of the most friendly researchers around. We see her mostly when she is on break from her teaching duties as Associate Professor, Education and Women's Studies at the Pennsylvania State University since 2008. It's been over the last 10 years. In terms of education, Jackie Reid-Walsh is in fact an alumni of McGill, having earned her PhD with a major in English literature in 1989. Her academic dossier is very impressive, including published books, first with a co-author C. Mitchell, with titles such as Researching Children's Popular Culture, 17 Going on 17, Girl Culture and Encyclopedia, and her most recent work called Interactive Books, Playful Media Before Pop-Ups, published in 2017. I have a copy here for everybody to have a look at the end of the talk. Recent articles by Jackie on movables are in several referee journals. For instance, in the Princeton University Library Chronicle, she wrote an article entitled 18th Century Flat Books for Children, Allegorical Metamorphosis and Spectacular Transformation. The titles have intrigued me so much. It's really a nice way of entering into her world of scholarship. Another article I cite is Books or Toys, A Traveler's Tale, about researching early movable books and by children in material and virtual collections, showing her expertise and research in special collections. Book chapters on girls and juvenilia, meaning writing by children, are for instance on girls and turn-up books. Modding as making, religious flat books created by 18th and 19th century Anglo-American girls. She enjoys working in libraries and museum collections and has curated one exhibit at Penn State University with the curator Sandy Stelz. It was entitled Playing to Learn, Learning as Play, 17th to 19th Century Playthings for Children, and it was up for about a year. The materials range from geographic board games, puzzles, to dissected maps and puzzles to construction toys. We've tried to simulate an exhibition of this kind. She has a website and a blog ongoing called Unfolding Metamorphoses, the Learning as Playing blog. And we also mention her journal startup as one of the founding co-editors of a journal called Girlhood Studies in 2008 out of New York as contributor, and this continues today, and she's on the editorial board as of today. Right now she's working on a piece with Brill on harlequinades and turn-up books, and she's working on a chapter on movable books for Cambridge University Press entitled The Cambridge History of Children's Literature. She has of course contributed to reference sources on children's lit, writing new entries on girlhood, for instance. Over the last couple of years, Jackie has developed a keen interest in collectors of children's books, especially of women collectors, and this is a new avenue for further research. This will be the topic of her talk tonight. With regards to the exhibition, I just wanted to point out that we have tried to simulate something that Jackie perhaps did at Penn State University. And we sort of were inspired by her quote, "Since the movable book is a hybrid artifact consisting of words and images and movable components, it crosses the borders between story, toy, and game." We have used these principles and we've had a lot of fun putting together this exhibition on the 4th floor. It is a wider preview of our children's collection, including all forms of interactive children's objects, and we see Rosalind Stern puppets mingle with Sheila Bourke picture books. This was achieved by spontaneous combustion and a little bit of girl power here between Jennifer Garland, Ellis Ing, the new liaison for children's literature here, and myself. But we had undeniable joy in testing the merchandise. Ellis will be filling you in on more on the collections, and just a reminder that we have 2 digital exhibits on the subject of children's collections. Now it is my great pleasure to welcome Jacqueline Reid-Walsh for her talk. Thank you.
All right, so today I'm going to talk about touch the surface of Mrs. Sheila Bourke's incredible children's collection. And I'm going to talk specifically, especially at the end, about a set of movable and interactive objects, because that's my own speciality. But the whole talk and the display are about books that pop in some way, whether they pop out at you or whether you can interact with them, or they're important in the history of children's literature, connected with an important publisher, so they're striking and they're unusual in some way, and this is what brings together my comments tonight. As I said, I'm just touching the surface of the 2,300 items, and it would be a dream task to just immerse yourself and go through all of them. Okay. And I'm also going to approach Mrs. Bourke. My angle is that she's a curator, collector, and I'm interested in the girl who became the collector and the adult woman as a collector. So I'm going to read this because this is a new area for me. Usually I just talk off the top of my head. So Mrs. Bourke's approach to forming her collection is absolutely fascinating. She's a knowledgeable collector who's been directly involved with the selection and acquisition of the items from the start. She's haunted antiquarian bookshops in Westmount and Montreal, attended book fairs, brought cast-off rare books from the Fraser-Hickson Library that she spied, and she's visited key children's collections such as the famous Osborne collection in Toronto. She's also worked directly with key book dealers specializing in children's literature in several countries, including the legendary Jonathan Schiller, and I'm going to show you something later that she bought from him in the box, just a treat. Okay, and here's one story that she told me. She attended with her sister the prestigious rare book summer school at the University of Virginia, and I said, oh, I would love to go to that. She said, oh, it was all right, but it was a good review, because she knew everything. I thought, oh, wow, yeah, okay. So, notably, beyond composing a judiciously chosen collection of primary sources, in other words, the books, Mrs. Bourke has included key reference books about the items and genres she's chosen. And on occasion, she's included supporting material, such as a late 19th century toy book with the accompanying wood blocks that were used to make it, which is incredible. You get an insight into how it was made. Importantly, this inclusion allows us to understand how books were made in earlier periods. Her thoroughness and generosity in providing primary, secondary, and supporting materials, in my opinion, turns her impressive collection into an important teaching collection. This enables us as readers and library users to learn about the objects by referencing a curated set of specialist resources. So as I said, I'm fascinated by her approach to collection formation, and it seems to me she does so as a curator would. So puzzling over the two terms, collector and curator, I ask several questions. Who is a collector-curator? Can I approach her collection biographically? In other words, a history of the collector as a girl and then a woman. How can I start to locate her collection within a larger context? So for the first task, being a good English Lit former student, I went right away to the Oxford English Dictionary, which was very disappointing on the definitions of collector and curator. And so I thought, what do I mean when I say those words? So a collector to me means a person with a passionate interest in a subject, who sets about acquiring items, who has a distinct approach and a purpose. Also a collector, and this is my opinion, is a knowledgeable amateur, not a book dealer. You could be both, I think, but who ultimately has a business relationship with the objects. A curator, to me, and I know I've had great fortune to know a number of curators here and at Penn State and other libraries. I go and bother them. Curators are the heroes of the world and heroines, in my opinion. Okay, so a curator to me is a knowledgeable and scholarly person who has advanced library skills, and I call these library literacies, and knows how to apply these skills in different arenas of selection, acquisition, and a thorough cataloging of a coherent set of books. So to be precise about the two terms, I draw on Dr. Richard Veer, who's retired emeritus curator here. He wrote in a recent conference paper he gave about the magnificent ongoing display of the books of hours that he co-curated at the Musée des Beaux-Arts, and you should go see that. His exhibit is just gorgeous. And he says in this paper, in the best sense, a collection is an assemblage of items that have been curated, that is, brought together with care and intention, and the collector is the one who has done so. So to me, this describes Mrs. Bourke's collection perfectly. And a good instance of her knowledge as a collector-curator is that on occasion, she has served as guest curators for special collections here. Am I talking too fast? Because I get excited and I go, just say Jackie. Okay. All right. Okay. In fall 1997, she created an exhibit, The Brownie World of Palmer Cox, working with a large set of materials donated by Cox's grandniece, Mrs. Phyllis Buchanan, and another collector, Wayne Morgan from Ontario. Largely forgotten today, Palmer Cox, 1840 to 1924, was a Canadian-born cartoonist and author-illustrator who made a successful career in the United States. As Mrs. Bourke says in her article at the beginning of the catalog, he took the Scottish folk figure of the Brownie, and who were benevolent, unseen creatures, and transformed them into a set of mischievous characters who engage in pranks or good deeds at night while the humans are all asleep. The first story, The Brownie's Ride, appeared in St. Nicholas magazine in 1883, which is this gorgeous foundational magazine of children's literature. I have a whole complete set in my office on top of my filing cabinets. My office is not tidy, but it's got the complete set of a St. Nicholas magazine. And the stories were later collected into Brownie Books, running until 1913. As Mrs. Bourke notes in her catalog, very early on, years before Disney, he was a popular culture phenomenon. He created characters who appeared in more than 40 formats, ranging from musicals to cross-media spin-offs, we would call spin-offs now, like games, toys, dolls, pencil cases, anything. But the best-known commercial application of the Brownies is when Eastman Kodak invented a camera known as the Brownie camera, designed to appeal to children due to simplicity. Did anybody here have the Brownie camera or know of the Brownie camera? It's cool. I thought, oh my God, isn't that neat? Okay. So Cox returned to Granby often and built a elaborate house there called Brownie Castle that still stands today. I haven't seen it. I'd like to make a field trip, a pilgrimage. And he's buried in the town cemetery. The township's Heritage Web Magazine article by Matthew Farfan draws extensively on Mrs. Bourke's research. So she has her creds as a curator. And where is it? I have it somewhere. Okay. This is a copy of the catalog that Mrs. Bourke did. So it's incredibly knowledgeable and interesting and about the Brownies. Okay. So this catalog was supported by the then head of special collections, Irina Murray, and edited by Dr. Veer. And Mrs. Bourke had some Brownie books in her collection. And as stated in the biographical notes, she grew up and loved her grandfather's copy of the Brownies, the book. And this is the copy in the collection here. So this is the Brownies, their book. But if you notice, there's a slip inside the first pages, the table of contents, lent by Mrs. Bourke. She hasn't given it. So I just thought that was, if you could read sideways, you can see that. On loan for Mrs. Sheila Bourke. And I thought, no, that's really interesting. Okay, so it's hers. It's still hers. It's not given to McGill yet. But what I'm saying is she's owned it because it's so special. And I thought that's really beautiful. Okay, now the long-standing personal connection to some of the children's materials brings me to my second question about Mrs. Bourke. What can we learn about her love of children's books since girlhood? Is there a connection between the reading girl and the collecting woman? So I had the privilege and pleasure of meeting Mrs. Bourke on a summer's day last August, and we drank tea and we chatted about our shared passion for historical children's books, ranging from movable books to girls' books to Walter de la Mare's poetry. She's a lifelong reader and lover of children's books across all genres, ranging from fantasy to adventure fiction. And she said that one of her favorite memories of being a little child was she had this research resource, an illustrated children's encyclopedia in its own case, and she can just still see it. And I thought, so always she was researching, not just reading. In particular, she mentioned the Wizard of Oz book series, as well as those of E. Nesbit, comic books, and a popular British story and cartoon series called Pip, Squeak, Wilfred, and Stanley, which I didn't know this until I'll show it in a minute, by Uncle Dick, who was P.J. Lamb, and illustrated by A.P. Payne. Now I'm going to show you an image of the series. So it was in the Princess Elizabeth gift book, published in 1935. And this is the section that's the Pip, Squeak, and Stanley. And it's really interesting, and she notes that it's like a cartoon in a way, or a graphic novel, but it's got bubbles for words, but also the story is underneath. So it's not a comic strip per se. I call it a comic strip, but that's not correct. So it's really very interesting. So I go from this to my first section is the collector as a girl. So Mrs. Bourke recalls how her mother encouraged reading. And I know that Mrs. Bourke attended the study school in Westmount as a child. She later graduated from King's Hall, Compton, an all-girls boarding school that later merged with Bishop's College School in the 70s and became what we know as Bishop's College School. And she took a degree from McGill University, Bachelor of Arts, in 1949, which is really cool, because not that many women had degrees in yay, okay. Get all excited, right. So I wondered about her early education, and if there were any traces of her love of childhood reading there. So I boldly approached, by Stephen telling me that, I got some information first. I approached Miss Patty Edwards, who's Director of Alumni Relations at the Study, and I combed the online yearbooks and magazines called the Trillium, and so I got some little bits for you. In the winter 2016 issue, there's an alumni profile, and I learned that 4 generations of Mrs. Bourke's family have attended the Study. I thought, wow, isn't that neat? Like her mother, Marion Crawford Ramsey, was one of the first generation of study girls that went there and realized how important, and was taught how important a good education is for women. And I thought, wow, that's incredible. And then she went along with her sister, and then their daughters went, and then the granddaughter went and graduated. So it's 4 generations, and I thought, that is just fantastic. Okay, so next I went through the online archives of the Study Chronicle with Ms. Patty Edwards, and I discovered 2 traces connecting Mrs. Bourke with fairy tales and nursery rhymes. First of all, in the dramatic notes for the Midsummer issue of 1941, I learned that Miss Sheila Ramsey acted in a play called The Happy Man by Margaret Irwin, concerning 3 princesses' search for a happy man who would give his shirt off his back to the king. And Sheila acted, if I'm calling her Sheila, I shouldn't do this, Mrs. Bourke. I don't know how to call her when she was a 7-year-old. Anyway, it doesn't matter. She acted the part of one of the princesses most successfully that was recorded. Okay, but a few years earlier, when she was 7, in an earlier issue, Midsummer 1935, On the same page is an excerpt of King George V's message to the children of the empire on the date of his Silver Jubilee. There's a short story by a young Sheila Ramsey, age 7, called The Sleepy Pussy Willows. And I told her about this on the phone after I found it. It concerns a year when the pussy willows do not come out in the spring as normal. The fairy queen sends along the sun and then 3 elves to waken them up with music. A little girl, Muriel, spies the elves and takes them home, feeds them with porridge, and then, quote, put them to bed like the old woman in the shoe, before the elves return to the queen, who compliments the girl's kindness. And I thought, oh, great, okay. So I would love to find more juvenilia by Mrs. Bourke. But to me, I'm interested how the record of her acting and the snippet of a story suggests to me how at a young age she appreciated, understood, and could appropriately apply traditional children's literature in specific context. She could make the comparison to the old lady with nursery rhyme and put it into her story. So, looking back on these intriguing traces, I wonder if these could be construed as precursors of a later interest in the field of children's literature. So I'll just take a sip. The collector is woman. Moving from the girl to the woman, I'm curious about how she started collecting children's books as an adult with children in school. In our conversation last summer, Mrs. Bourke related how when she started, she was all by herself in collecting children's books. It wasn't a hot interest of many people. She initially learned about collecting from a book she bought from a bookshop on Green Avenue with the charming title of Abbas for I can't pronounce it right, Abbas? I don't cook. See? I like to eat, okay, for bibliophiles. Okay. So, this is the copy here. I have it on my card. So, how do you say Bouillabaisse? Okay. Thank you. All right. It sounds delicious. And so I started dipping into it and reading a lot of the short bits and things. And it was written in 1955. And I was interested how the Targ says, not many women, and he said bookman, but he said bookwoman, there aren't that many women who collect. And I thought, that's really interesting. Is it still like that? Are there less women collectors? So anyway, after this book, as she told me, she set about buying the first book for her collection. And this is an early 19th century book by a woman called A Peep at the Eskimo, or Scenes on the Ice, to which is annexed a polar pastel with 40 colored plates from original designs by a lady, 1825. And we have that here, of course. So this is a page of, I would say, Inuit life by an observer who traveled up north with the colored art by the same woman. And what Mrs. Bourke is so incredible, she includes all the subsidiary information with the book. This is a newspaper clipping from the Globe and Mail from 65? Wait a minute. February 4th, 1963. It's a clipping from the Globe and Mail. And the article talks about how a visitor from Montreal came to the display where this book was exhibited and said that the writer, and identified the woman, the lady who wrote this book about visiting the Eskimo, as Lady Love, who for a time lived in Montreal, leaving in 1841. So this is in this article. So again, you get to contextualize, she contextualizes her books for us, which is absolutely fascinating. Okay, so early on in her collecting career, Mrs. Bourke was given a set of toy books by an elderly lady who became interested in those. Now, toy books is a vague term to modern day terms. Toy books can refer to movable books and any book that's toy-like. But toy books are also referred to just a picture book. And then sometimes toy books is used to refer to inexpensive books, like sixpence books or something. So it's not exactly a precise term. The meaning has changed over time. So she got very, very interested in some of the famous children's book illustrators of the 19th century, by Walter Crane and his contemporaries, Randolph Caldecott and Kate Greenaway. So these are the major authors of the 19th century. And if I knew more about the history of color printing, I could go off about that. But I'm sure people in the audience know that. She also bought girl almanacs. And some of the Caldecott and Crane we have on display, and we have examples to show you too, because they revolutionized the history of color printing. And during the time when Dr. Robinson was principal at McGill, 1962 to 70, she met the then head of libraries and became interested in Chap Books. She also became fascinated by the illustrator Dueck and in woodblock illustration. And then later on, she met Dr. Hans Müller. Is that how you pronounce it? Thank you. I knew him well, I loved Hans. In 1977, he became head of libraries, and she connected with him over their love of Hans Christian Andersen and fairy tales. She visited the Osborne collection in Toronto, which you know is a famous children's literature collection. The Osborne catalog is the level of cataloging in children's books. And she worked with the then head, Judith St. John, and she became interested in religious chapbooks. So I'm going to show you some images now of chapbooks and woodblock printing. But the religious chapbooks was interesting ones. They were presented as if they were a regular chapbook and not educational. They were misrepresented in a way by the religious organizations to make it look like more fun than perhaps it really was. So what I want to do now is show you a few examples, because there's an extensive example of woodblock illustration in her collection, and they range across the centuries. And I got ahead of myself talking about chapbooks, so I got excited, you see. I went down 2 paragraphs. But anyway, so extensive examples of woodblock illustration, and the examples range across the centuries. Okay, this I'm going to show carefully, and the librarians touch this. Okay, this is an Aesop's Fables in Latin from 1571. And if you peek inside, you can see some beautiful woodcut. They all crane their heads. Later we will have skilled hands and minds showing us a few. But you can see the woodcuts, like right from, there's 100 of them. So even from the very beginning, this idea of children needing images in order to be attracted. Okay, so that's safely back there. That's terrifying handling something. Okay, but woodcuts had a long life. They were used for hundreds of years in printing, especially in what was known as a cheap print of the period, like pamphlets and little booklets that were called chap books because they were sold by traveling peddlers who were called chapmen. And so that's why they were called chap books. And I did a big research project on 17th century ones when on my sabbatical I hung around the Bodleian for a whole year and bothered everybody. It was just incredible. So I've got really into 17th century, woodblocks and chapbooks and oh my God, you name it. All right. So for 200 years, these books were really popular in England and America, and they were really inexpensive, okay? So like they were not for rich and middle-class people, but semi-literate, including children. They were really inexpensive objects, which I think is very important. Now, McGill has an incredible collection of chapbooks, over 900 items, from the 18th and 19th century, and they're all digitized and everything. They're gorgeous. And 500 are from the Sheila Bourke collection. So you get an incredible collection of chapbooks. And she's especially interested in Scottish ones. And I don't have a Scottish one to show you, but she's in Glasgow. And oh, yeah, it's great talking about that. Okay, so now I'm going to show you some images. In the 18th century, Thomas Dueck revolutionized how woodcuts were made. And I don't know much about this, but it's terribly cool. If you cut with the grain, which is called a woodcut, it's easier to cut, but it's not as hard. If you cut against the grain, I read a beautiful poem the other day about end grain. And my husband sitting at the back laughed, and I said, oh, that's what a woodcut's. Everybody laughed at me, only I would you know. Anyway, cutting this way, it makes it, you go against the grain, but it makes it harder, right? Some of you in the audience are artists and you know all this, but I thought how fantastic. So it's called wood engraving, and so this is what Dueck did. So I have some images to show you okay, so this is a Thomas Dueck. It's from a set, set isn't the right word, it's like 3 different little chap books that are all together in a volume. And this is from the natural history of British quadrupeds. And so there's ones about birds, there's quadrupeds, there's a whole bunch, and they're all together between 1820 and 1824. But I wanted to show you 2 of the Dueck cuts. They're beautiful, how they're detailed they are, and it's because of his innovations. And there's an incredible Dueck collection here, too. I wanted to show you that. Okay. Did I jump too far ahead? Okay. Another example of a woodcut in a chap book is a moral chap book that's American. See how tiny it is? Anne-Marie did the most beautiful PowerPoint here, and she put the pencil there to show how tiny this little thing is. It never occurred to me to do that, because you can't tell anything on a PowerPoint, right? The scale, anyway, this cute little thing is called a keepsake, and it's an example of early American printing. The illustrations are by Alexander, wait a minute, if I jumped ahead again. Oh, the illustrations were by an early American printer called Alexander Anderson, who, as an aside, is a specialty of Mrs. Bourke's sister. She specializes in Allen print. What a family. Oh my God. Okay. Anyway, so this little keepsake is a really interesting book. It's American, and I read it through, and it's actually about race relations. It's really quite disturbing. The last little story is called The Swing. And so a group of little white children come and play on the swing. And then when they go away, a little group of black children come and play on the swing. And then afterwards, the narrator says, and who do you think had more fun? And so it's this little book. And so it's very small, but the wood, again, it's a chap book. It's American. It's 19th century. Now I want to show you one other example, and I'll be showing it to you several times because I love it so much, so I'm just repeating myself. But this is a later 19th century book with woodcuts. Okay. So this is lovely. It's a Cinderella in the little class slipper by the McLaughlin brothers. It only cost 5 cents. It's 1863 to 1864. And what Mrs. Bourke did, she has a little book. It's like, you can call it a toy book. It's colored. But she also has the wood blocks, all the wood blocks that made it. And thank goodness they were numbered, because I was sitting there trying, because you have to do it backwards, right? Like the image is backwards, and then you have that. So Anne-Marie cleverly picked the right one, because I had the wrong one. And so there's a picture of the proposal scene. This is in the book, and this is what it looks like in the block, because it's reversed. And here, the same image is on the cover with, of course, the title that's reversed. So the whole little book has all the blocks. And so I have the box here to show you because I just love it. I think, oh wow, you can imagine how it was made. You can see how it's made. Okay. So during the conversation, we spent 3 hours. We forgot what time was. We just drank tea and talked. It was just the most lovely afternoon. Mrs. Bourke told me she became interested in bookbinding. And so the course was in French. So she went out of Montreal on the bus and took the course in French. So she's very fluent in bookbinding terms in French. I don't know the bookbinding terms in English. So I thought, wow, she's fascinating. So anyway, I saw a couple of lovely examples at her home of some of her beloved children's books that she's rebound herself. And one was a Walk de la Mer, Peacock Pie, from 1930, illustrated by Heath Robinson. And she was introduced to the book when she was 3 years old. And so it fell apart, because you love it too much. And so she rebound it in beautiful green. And it's just lovely, and she showed it to me. So Mrs. Bourke, the same day, she shared some of her wisdom with me about collecting children's books. She said she decided to put limits on what she bought, mainly illustrated books, by 4 illustrators in particular. They're the ones that are called the Golden Age, Crane and Caldecott and so on. She decided not to collect only the best known and most expensive items, such as those by Arthur Rackham, because he is. There's an Arthur Rackham collection here, but it's very, very expensive. So she decided when she was making decisions to buy broadly, to buy what she likes, what will be a sound purchase, and not follow a fad. So her purchasing acumen, in addition to her specialist knowledge in book history, has led to her unique collection that we have here today. Now, am I okay for time? I'm getting near the end. So, okay. The third question I would like to touch on briefly is, how can we start to locate Mrs. Bourke's collection within a larger context? So here I draw on Leslie Skeen's excellent master's paper from McGill in Library Science in 2013, called The Progression of Color Illustration Through Children's Books, and she worked with Professor Peter McNally on this paper. She examines the Bourke collection within the context of other McGill special collections of children's books that include a general collection, a Soviet collection in Russian, a Sunday school collection, the Arthur Rackham collection, and one devoted to Chandra Books, which is so sad when they closed and, well, first of all went to Toronto, but then stopped. She discovered that Ms. Skeen discovered that the holdings of Randolph Caldecott are particularly strong. So Mrs. Bourke collected 28 of 36 books he wrote and illustrated, and they're all in very good condition, and we have an example of that. And I love Caldecott more than Crane. I hope I'm allowed to say Crane's nice. I love Crane, but I like Caldecott because they move. You know, like the figures are in motion, and you get this sense of movement, and I just love that. But Crane's gorgeous, like stained glass. So they're both gorgeous in totally different ways. Skeen notes the collection is very well rounded, for there's not only substantial holdings of Walter Crane, Kate Greenaway, Arthur Rackham, but also Thomas Dueck, George Cruikshank, and Howard Pyle. To gain some insight into situating Mrs. Bourke's collection in relation to the field of historical children's literature, I looked into 2 things. One, the presence of foundational printers of children's books in her collection, and also connections with famous collectors who themselves formed foundational collections. So first of all, I noticed some books in her collection that are published by the famous Newbery family. So John Newbery, for those who don't know, is considered the foundational commercial printer in London, in England. He made it go as a market. He was very market-driven and clever, and he wrote these lovely little goody two-shoes, which I always wonder what it really meant. But she wasn't at all a dry, boring girl. She was out there, okay? And so I was interested with the connection of a book in the Bourke collection with Newbery. And so this is like his family continued afterwards, like his relatives and so on, and they still worked from their store in St. Paul's Churchyard. Years ago when I was a graduate student, I dragged my husband over to England and we looked for the blue sign that told us about St. Paul's, that John Newbery was there. But last time I went I couldn't find it, so I hope they put it back. They were renovating. You have to have it. It's just, that's where children's literature started. Okay. And of course, Newbery's motto, which was in Latin, I don't speak Latin, was instruction with delight. So he was taking the idea from John Locke about, instruction should be playful and playful instruction and combining it. His ideas, if you look at this book I'm going to show you, we may not find it, our idea of playful instruction. But we're talking 18th century here. There was, scared into learning, basically, was how learning was. So this is a nonfiction book. Well, fiction, nonfiction. It's called The Newtonian System of Philosophy, adapted to the capacities of young gentlemen and ladies, and familiarized and made entertaining by objects from which they are intimately acquainted. Being the subject of 6 lectures read to a Littlepillian society by Tom Telescope. I love that, A.M. Okay. So maybe Newbery wrote it. He didn't really say he wrote a lot of stuff, but he took this persona of Tom Telescope teaching children about optics and things. And it's methodized for the benefit of the youth of this kingdom by their old friend Mr. Newbery in St. Paul's Churchyard. So this is the 5th edition, printed for T. Carnham and F. Newbery Jr. in St. Paul's Churchyard in 1770. And I thought, cool. Okay, so we've got a Newbery here. We're like not a facsimile like the real thing. Okay, all right. I'm almost at the end. I'm not going to go about that. But another thing, I thought, oh, that's really cool. So what else can I check? So I thought, well, Mrs. Bourke's collection also has Croft references with other famous children's literature collectors who, again, have made the collections that we can study and learn about children's books. And for example, Iona and Peter Opie, whose massive collection of more than 20,000 items is at the Bodleian Library. And this is a show book of the Opie collection, which is also very, very scholarly. And Mrs. Opie and their son and the great and scary Brian Alderson wrote this. Okay. But it's considered the premier collection in England for studying children's books, and it's now all cataloged online. So you can, it's fabulous. So I was thrilled to see that there's a connection with the Opies in Mrs. Bourke's collection. And this book is Proverbs exemplified and illustrated by pictures from real life, teaching morality and a knowledge of the world. But the Reverend J. Tressler, and it's again illustrated by Dueck. But what I loved is there's a red stamp of the Opie collection on the recto of the front cover. So there's that little stamp, the little red stamp is like it was in the Opie collection. And this is the book. Now, I'm sure some clever person in the audience could tell me what this book plate is. I don't know. So I also noted connections with other famous children's collections. If you've ever been to Princeton to the Coatson collection, which is a phenomenal collection, I had a fellowship there years ago. And there's at least one book in the Bourke collection that is Mrs. Coatson's own book plate with her annotation of when she got it. And it's a French songbook, and please, my French is appalling. It's a French songbook from the early 20th century, Les Plus Belles Chansons pour les Enfants, and it's by the famous Pellerin et Penel print company, who did like toy theaters and like sets and incredible stuff. They got a great collection here. So, my hopes for later projects, like Leslie Skeen says in her essay, would be to compare the scope of the Bourke collection to other famous children's collections, like in Toronto or Oxford, and also within McGill, like collections like the Stern, Rosalind Stern collection, like the Eminent Woman collection, that aspect is really exciting.
Thank you to Jackie, thank you very much. I am one of the smallest members of staff, but thankfully also the loudest, so I think I will avoid the microphone if I can. I just want to again reiterate our thanks to Dr. Reid-Walsh for this amazing talk and for all of the extra bits of information she's peppered my week with, which I very much appreciated. I'm going to tell you a bit more about our children's collection and how you can access them, which every single one of you is quite able to do and welcome to do. I think that Jackie has done an astounding job of giving you an insight into the wonderful, wonderful Sheila Bourke collection that I am so fortunate to be the librarian that's responsible for this collection. Our wonderful Dean Colleen Cook, I've heard her say a few times that she is the best job in the world, but I do tend to think that we in Rare Books could give her a run for her money, because we get to do stuff like this, which is really fun. And the exhibit in the lobby as well was a joy to put together with Jennifer and with Anne-Marie. So believe it or not, what you've seen tonight is a very small sampling of our children's collection and the Sheila Bourke collection as well, included within that banner. All of the books that you saw tonight, as well as the thousands and thousands of additional children's books that we house here, are accessible to all of you. And this is something that is true whether or not you are a McGill student, a McGill member of staff, a member of the public. You are all welcome to access these books. And indeed, that is something we would like you to do. There are several ways you could do this. You can search our online catalog and you can request books through the catalog. Or what's easier is you can email me directly and you can say, I'm interested in this. And I will get the books for you. You can make your own miniature museum here in the reading room for your personal pleasure. It's a very nice, quiet, peaceful space. One of the news stories that's been making the rounds lately is how doctors in Quebec have started giving prescriptions for visits to the art museums, which is fantastic. So we have evidence that beautiful things are good for your mental health. And of all the beautiful things in this building that houses so many beautiful things, the children's books are really, I think, the gems in our crown. They literally glitter, they literally sparkle, and they're just beautiful. So please take advantage of this amazing collection. I think Jackie did a really great job of explaining what the job of a curator and a collector is. And I would just add that a librarian's job is to give access. We're not here to hoard these treasures for ourselves. We're here to share them with you all. So please, please do take me up on this offer. Some of my cards are at the back there by the wine, and I have some in my pocket, so I'm very happy to give you my details so that you can get in touch. And please spread the word as well.